these are wealthy OECD nations that we're comparing against already. So it's not against the whole world. But the 16 comparable wealthy OECD nations that we've been doing these report cards against, Canada comes 13th. And more than that, Canada gets, they divide all of the metrics that they're measuring, which are pretty good metrics here, they divide them into quartiles. So you get an A, a B, a C, or a D, depending on where you end up relative to your peers. And we get 13 Ds, 2 Cs, 6 Bs, and no As. I wouldn't want to be bringing that report card home. So, there is definitely room for improvement. Now, where we do well is in invention, and also in entrepreneurship in general. We do well. And so I'm going to speak to those a little more detail and show where our strengths are as a nation at the moment. So in terms of scientific articles, and in terms of the top cited papers, so top 1% in the world of cited articles, we punch above our weight, right? So we're in already this very high bar. We're in the upper portion of it. In terms of the ease of entrepreneurship in various clusters across our country and any national regulatory regimes, it's pretty easy to actually start a company here and to be an entrepreneur. The entrepreneurial services are good, and talent is good. And new firm density, which is a measure of how many new firms were created in the past 5 years. Again, we're scoring well. But when we switch over from the invention and entrepreneurship metrics to innovation metrics, and when I'm using the term innovation, I'm talking about first commercial market introduction, right? So I consider patents, although it is a metric that's used for innovation, I consider it a halfway house, if you will, because the definition of innovation that I use and that is widely used is actually getting a product to the market for the first time, right? So. But first of all, let's look at patents because it's a great transition metric and we have good data on it. We still fall down there. If we take patents normalized to our population or to the number of research dollars spent, we get a D compared to our OECD peers. In terms of the innovation happening in technology manufacturing, technological manufacturing, we don't score well. This is one that particularly concerns me, which is science entrepreneurship metrics. And this metric is patenting firms, the number of firms who have applied for triadic patents, so patents in the US, in Europe, and Japan, within 5 years of founding. Now, I agree that that metric is not perfect, but what they're trying to get at is firms that believe that they have something that's valuable around the world, right? And so that's a good proxy for science-based ventures. That's not happening to the degree that we certainly have the potential to happen in Canada. Venture capital, the story's got better in the last couple of years. The last report that was issued by the Conference Board of Canada on a national comparative level was 2014. And it's gotten better in the last few years, but it still has been a drag on innovation in our economy. Our deal size, the overall number of deals and deal sizes are about half the size, even accounting for per capita, of those in the States. And lastly, export market share in different areas is a drawback. So this is the not so good news right now, and I'm going to talk about some strategies we can use, and particularly some innovation policy, national, regional, university levels that we could use to move this needle. BC, the story is a lot better. So, for the home crowd here, there is a window of hope, and certainly this is, as we all know, in Canada, we do well in those types of innovation that sometimes are non-patenting, but that are definitely less capital intensive and that have a lower time frame to get them to find out if they're successful or not, right? So in terms of in BC, the tech sector has been growing very strongly. We recently got a report, I don't think we paid them, to say that we were the best startup ecosystem in the world. No, sorry, best startup system in Canada. That would have been a stretch. Number 15 in the world. And that it's been growing, it's been growing very, very fast, but this is, majority of these firms are in services, information communication technologies, engineering services, software firms, and 90% of the tech sector has to do with services in BC. There's huge potential, as there is in other parts of Canada. I just have this data. There's huge potential in clean tech, top 10 world cluster. There's more than 200 firms, lots of R&D strength in our universities here, and in personalized medicine. But this is still very nascent, and so far the numbers are more on the invention side still. Okay, so why is it? Why not? Why aren't we yet living up to our potential? I mean, obviously the people in this room are sitting outside of the norm here, but as a country, we're not living up to our potential. Well, this was a survey done, an interesting survey that was commissioned by Industry Canada. It's back in 2009, but I cite it because it was such a well-done survey. It was responded to by over 5,000 CEOs of companies that had 20 or more employees across different sectors. And they were asked, what is your major barrier? What is your company and you individually your major barrier to innovation? And these CEOs said, perception of risk and uncertainty. So to me, that was rather ironic, but telling, because with risk and uncertainty comes opportunity. And if you're not willing and able to manage and take that on culturally, with whatever the organizational skills are in that organization, managerial strengths, if that's not there, then this is a natural place where we're going to fall down in the path from invention to innovation. This is particularly problematic if you happen to be in one of those areas like personalized medicine or like areas of clean tech, say you're carbon engineering or general fusion, or you're a firm that has a long time to commercialization, from invention to first market introduction, high uncertainty, particularly technology uncertainty, which, for example, a software firm wouldn't have, or certainly not an apps development firm. And if you look at the red dot, this is symbolizing the commercialization costs. So once you've done R&D and you're trying to scale up the pilot plant, once you're trying to, for biotech, I'm putting clinical trials in this box. So there's a lot of money that you have to commit when you still have a lot of technology uncertainty, and there's a long time frame from when you first have to start making those commitments to when you're getting your money back. It's a hard space, and it takes skills in innovation management and commercialization to navigate this space. It also certainly helps if you have your national and regional and university innovation policies aligned. Okay, I'm going to give you some numbers behind this. This is the schematic to get the idea across. And here's a table. This is a review paper that a venture capitalist who specializes in advanced materials sector, nanomaterials, Pranesh Sigopal, who's with Pangea Ventures. He and I wrote this review paper and published it last year in Nature Materials. And it was to try to articulate and put some numbers behind the difference between, we just step back here, what we're calling science-based ventures, of which advanced materials, which underlies a lot of clean tech innovation, and biotech, those would all fit in science-based ventures. The difference between those and what we're calling technology ventures. When people talk about the tech sector, they're generally meaning these technology ventures. And we're trying to show there's a separate category. It is in the innovation literature. In particular, Gary Pisano at Harvard Business School has written about science-based ventures as being those who are on the emerging edge of science. So they're actually trying to profit from, profit from commercializing science and technology, but they're also patenting, publishing, they're contributing to the development of science at the same time. And they face, obviously, a lot higher technology uncertainty than tech ventures do. So let's look back at this comparison with some numbers. On the top here, think of this as tech ventures. And I've got IT here, but let's take the extreme example of apps development. So anybody here developed an app? Okay. How long did it take you?
A few months.
A few months? Okay. So it's typically when I poll people, thank you, it's a few months, 3-6 months, a few $100,000 max they're spending, and they are going to be able to find out. They still have market uncertainty, but they're going to be able to find out soon if it's accepted or not. And their technology uncertainty, like there is some technology uncertainty of not achieving your objectives, but it's much lower than, for example, developing a new therapeutic that you then have to put through clinical trials, or developing a membrane for water treatment that is going to be like a mine on the end of a waste treatment facility, or developing an alternative energy transportation system. These have a lot of technological uncertainty as well as market uncertainty. The costs of commercialization, here again, think clinical trials, that can be up to $1 billion to get through all of them. Pilot facilities, 50 to several $100 million could be involved. So it would be very reasonable for you to say at this point, I'm an investor, although not enough women are. Apparently only 1% of VCs are women, which is something I'd love this room to help change. But say you are a VC investor, you could say, you know what? That's the space I'm putting my money in. That's the low-hanging fruit. And I can understand that. But then if you, from a strictly financial return point of view, but there's a totally other argument to be made that, first of all, there is profit to be made in these sectors when managed in using a number of ways to balance your portfolio. And secondly, that this is where the big global challenges reside. This is where we're going to work on curing cancer or other diseases. This is where efficiently targeted, minimally toxic chemo treatments are going to be. This is where clean water and alternative energy and low carbon economy, these are where these are going to happen, right? So there's absolutely, from a university's point of view, a big reason to be involved here. From a national innovation point of view, a big reason here. And a lot more charitable institutions are also getting involved directly in helping to stimulate entrepreneurship and innovation in these spaces. Okay. So where do women fit in here? I talked about earlier about women being, as a group, as a sector, being, as a half the population, being more interested in solving problems that face humanity and big global challenges. And that seems to be, that's a hypothesis of mine, but that seems to be borne up by the numbers of how women choose their discipline, particularly engineers. And I'd be interested in talking anecdotally with people afterwards that had any other data that supported that. But for starters, what's the news in Canada in women that are in STEM and involved both in invention and innovation? Well, STEM graduates is getting better. Still compared to people that are in other, the percentage of women in university is much higher than men now, but in STEM it's the other way around. It's getting better than it was. I look at these engineering stats of 22% of engineering graduates in 2014 were women, and that doesn't sound very different from where our numbers were 25 years ago. I've got my 25th anniversary from Queen's Engineering this fall, which is a bit daunting. and actually working in STEM fields is still low. So there's still some work to do, but it does look like there is, particularly in science and technology fields, significantly more women entering these fields. This is where the comment came from about women being interested disproportionately in areas that are aligned with these global challenges. So here we have biosystems. I've also seen similar numbers for biomed, categorized that way. And what it's showing you is 45% of the people, the engineers that are in that field, are women. And if that was a subsector of mechanical engineering, which biomedical often is in many different universities, mechanical engineering is here at 12% women. So the overall discipline here, and to do with the biomedical field, much higher. And similarly, if you look at environmental, you have 41% women in that field. So that to me is interesting, and I would like to explore it further and see why. I'm happy that women are making that choice, but maybe that speaks to different ways that some other traditional disciplines could make an environment that was more enticing when girls and women are making those choices in high school and first-year university. Now here's some other data as we move from women that are in invention and innovation. This is data from alumni from MIT, so it is a biased sample, but it's a big sample. And Fiona Murray, who's one of the two deans of innovation across all of MIT, she has been digging into this field and doing a lot of research on women who are inventors and innovators and entrepreneurs. And so this was a sample of 20,000 respondents that are MIT alumni, and it's looking at all the way from alumni from the 40s through to 2014. So the oldest alumni they'd be looking at would be about in their 70s now, from when they did the sample. And they looked at a survey that asked them to self-identify whether or not they considered themselves an inventor, then whether or not they had a patent, and how many they did, and whether or not they were involved with product development. And one of the things you can see from this, sample of significant sample of women and men entrepreneurs. So first of all, they looked at the difference in numbers, and obviously there was a lot more male alumni than there was female, but this is just the percentage. So the percentage of male alumni who self-identify as an inventor is nearly double that of the women alumni. For patents, it's very similar, those who've had a patent. And for product development, a lot narrower of a gap. Another interesting piece of that study was they broke them into cohorts. So you're looking at cohorts of alumni graduating from MIT in these different decades. And the question was, were you involved in entrepreneurship as a founder in the first 5 years after your graduation? And you can see that in the 60s, there was a brief heyday, but in a lot of areas. But when we move forward here, there's a very, very big gap between the male alumni, percentage of male alumni who are, and the percentage of women alumni who are. And that could be all sorts of reasons, particularly this first 5 years. There's a lot going on in many women's lives at that point that competes with being an entrepreneur, but that's some interesting data. There's some further studies which I haven't shown here that Fiona Murray's done some really interesting ones where she's looked at a population across the US. She's looked at life sciences, PhDs, who then have gone on to careers in life sciences, and controlling for all sorts of dimensions about networks, about patenting activity, about invention. She finds that there's demand side factors where women are less likely, controlling for everything, to be invited onto scientific advisory boards. Women are less likely to be invested in by VCs. And interestingly to me, they're less likely to have their tech transfer office bet on them and patent, patent their patent rather than, because in the US, everybody, the university owns all the IP. Then they strike a deal, but they decide whether or not to patent. So there's some things that are working well. There's certainly some unconscious bias out there, as well as choices that are being made that could be better understood, and some steps that could be taken. So in summing up, Canada's innovation potential, we're doing really well in non-patenting areas. We have great strengths in invention and entrepreneurship. And if we could translate those strengths into more patents, into more science-based ventures, I think we would have a great potential to scale those ventures and build knowledge-based economies. Some things we could do to help that happen. One of them is to do with tech transfer offices across the country. First of all, it's a hodgepodge across the country. Even those, other than Waterloo, even those that say that they are inventor-owned, there's strings and caveats tied to that. Essentially, it would be lovely to be able to give these nascent ventures, these academic entrepreneurs and their grad students and their colleagues, an easier ride to get their inventions out into the marketplace. So setting up the situation where they're not going to have VCs avoid them. So I call that having the tech transfer office or the granting councils help invest in IP without punitive measures to the spin-offs. There's things we can do with early stage financing, a Canadian equivalent of the SBIR. We certainly need to be thinking about unconscious bias and what can be done to address that. We're hearing a lot about that in Silicon Valley at the moment. One other aspect that we can do is we can train both our male and our female scientists, engineers, grad students, postdocs, faculty members, to feel more comfortable with managing under uncertainty, to think more about, while they're still in the lab, whether or not their current assumptions about the value of attributes they're developing are actually valued by who they think they are. We could tell them more about IP protection and business models and raising financing. So that's what I have time for. We have a program that is doing that in the local innovation ecosystem. It's called Invention to Innovation. We're taking our third cohort starting next week. And we're actively looking for more women innovators and women mentors for the program. These are two students from our first cohort who are working, Motoré is working in clean tech, and Jana is finishing her PhD and has worked for Boeing for 10 years and is working in the aerospace composites sector. And they're both wonderful examples, but there's a lot that we can do to help the innovation ecosystem and to provide the skill sets to let people not only start technology ventures, but also be comfortable leading innovation and leading new product development in a mid-sized company, and be comfortable reaching into the university and helping take some great inventions out of the lab and into society. With that, thank you for your attention. I welcome any questions.